I clearly remember just walking away from my job because I was a mess. I just woke up one morning. I just got back to work and I woke up the next day and there wasn't 1 ounce of me that wanted to be there. So I woke up, I did the pre-start. We had a drill crew on site at the time, so we had our morning meeting, and I remember I just went back to my room straight after that and just cried. I was curled up in a ball on my bed and I was just a complete wreck. So I rang my wife and I just said, I don't think I can do this anymore. And she said, that's fine. She said, whatever you need to do, you just get yourself home and we'll work it out. So,
well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a really powerful moment. And the next thing I did is I rang my boss and I resigned. I just said, I can't do this anymore. I said, I'm really struggling for a lot of reasons. I don't think I fully explained it at the time, but so yeah, I resigned from my job. And I've never resigned on the spot before. I always give notice. I've always, I like to do the right thing, but I wasn't at a point where I could do that. So I got in my car and I put my backpack, because I usually travel pretty light. I think I had a couple extra things. I put them in my car and I drove home. And I just remember in that drive, I had friends ringing me just to, wish me the best and say that they were really happy for me because they knew, I think, what it was doing. And I remember a huge weight being lifted.
Everything is working out for me. It's working out for you, too. It just takes believing that it is. We can have, be, and do anything. The key is to care about how you feel and choose to feel good right now. I'm here today with Aaron Harvey, who is from Exmouth, Australia, and he is the host of the Inner Expeditions podcast. Aaron, I'm really excited to talk with you. Based on what I know from your journey, you've really come so far in your life in choosing your passion, what you want your life to represent, and choosing what you want as far as your family is concerned. And I just think that you have a lot to share with the world and my audience. And I just think it's such a pleasure having you here. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Katie. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for reaching out and getting me on. I'm always excited to share my experiences and, my past, and hopefully inspire people to do something as well if they're struggling with things or if they're just looking for that something to get things going in their life. It's always a pleasure to share that. So, yeah, thanks very much for having me on.
Can you give everybody just kind of a summary of what happened? You were working and you had a job that you weren't entirely happy at. It was taking you away from your family. There was a lot of travel, things like that.
Yeah.
And you also had some personal travel with your wife, Renee. And that led to some lifestyle changes with your body, your mental focus. A whole bunch of things were going on in that period of time, which kind of prompted you to make a big lifestyle change.
Yeah, it did. As you said, I was working away, what we call in Australia FIFO work, which is fly in, fly out. So that entailed me flying to work. I was working for a mining exploration company, very remote, right in the sort of outback of Australia. And I was doing 12 days at work and then 9 days at home. So I was away from my family for 12 days at a time. During that time, I was overweight. I was about 110 kilos, which I think is about 230, 240 pounds, I think.
It is. I looked it up before we came in here, just so I could clarify.
Yeah, so I was, and I'm only like 5'6", so 165 centimeters. I was pretty stocky, and the job that I was doing, I was managing, so I was not really terribly active. And over that period, work had sort of quietened off and things weren't really busy. There's a downturn in the commodity that I was working in, so work was pretty quiet. And it involved being, fairly isolated and fairly alone. And at this stage, I think I'd had one child. I had my first daughter who I was working away from. I was away from her and my wife. So things just started getting a bit, you get a bit lonely when you do that, and a bit unhappy with your work. And I was unhappy with myself as well. So when I found out we were pregnant with our second child, I decided that I really needed to get myself in shape and lose some weight, and be a bit more available, physically for my family, expecting, to chase around after my kids. So, I mean, at the start, it was just as simple as doing 10,000 steps a day. I got my hands on a Fitbit from a friend. He had an old one he wasn't using, and my goal just for the next year coming up, which was when my second daughter was going to be born, was just to do 10,000 steps a day. So,
and were you successful with that for the year?
Yeah. So what I did was I wore it for the end of, I think, 2016. I just wore it just to see what I was doing stepwise, and I was doing about 5,000 steps a day, which is about average for most people, and you generally want to be up around 10. So come January 1, I made that decision to wear the Fitbit, and it just made me start to, take the stairs and do the jobs I would normally put off. If we'd been camping, it's late, I'll unpack tomorrow. I would unpack it that day, and I started doing it. And that's as simple as where it all started. I had no idea that, what to come would follow. But yeah, for a starting point, it was just as simple as moving more regularly.
So this was a New Year's resolution, basically, because you started the beginning of January.
Yeah.
A lot of people can relate with that. A lot of people get into that exercise mode at the beginning of the year. And the trick is to stick with it and actually turn it into a lifestyle change, because usually people are pretty good for a couple months and then it just starts to trail off and they fall back into patterns. So what was your experience as far as keeping that going?
Well, I guess it was it kind of timed where there was a New Year's resolution. That wasn't sort of really the plan. I didn't want to go in with the New Year's resolution because it always, you're sort of setting yourself up to fail.
Yes, oftentimes.
Yeah, it just worked out that would work well for me. So I don't know how to explain it, but there was definitely a change in my mindset that I was going to do this. So I started eating a lot healthier. I changed my diet, and the way I was looking at it was, if I'm going to change, I need to change in a way that I'm going to be happy to continue on with this lifestyle. It has to be a complete lifestyle change. I was, on break, we were making really good money, and early on in the piece, we were living in the Margaret River region, which is really famous for, food and wine and good food and microbreweries and all of that stuff. So we could afford to live and eat well on our breaks. And we did. I was definitely one of those guys, we were going and eating out fairly regularly. Having beers and good times and all of those sorts of things. So for me, I realised that I couldn't continue on this path sustainably to be there, for my family. So that was kind of the starting point for me. And then once I started the 10,000 steps, I was on a site where we were basically looking after a 200-man camp that was empty because the mine site had sort of run through its cycle, and there wasn't a lot for us to do due to the downturn in 2012. So it was a fairly empty site, pretty boring, and I thought, well, to get my steps up every day, I'll just hop in. There's a little gym out the back. I'll hop on the treadmill and do some steps to, get my count up. And then I got a bit bored with that because it was just a really small little gym. There was no TV and that.
That's fair.
Yeah. So I thought, well, maybe I could do a little bit of running just to, spice things up a bit. So I started running a little bit and I struggled. I think I could barely run, 30 seconds without my lungs just feeling like they wanted to explode. But I kept on with it, and I had that mindset that I wasn't going to give this up for anything. So 30 seconds turned into a minute running, and it kind of just escalated from there. And then obviously getting home, it was easy while I was at work because I was isolated, and then, I'd struggle a little bit at home, and then I just sort of realised that I needed to keep this up while I was at home and level things out. That involved sort of only having a beer on the weekend while I was at home, not drinking during the week. And it really just gained more and more momentum from there and rolled on. So,
was it difficult, or were you pretty into it and seeing results and really liking the way you were feeling? Was it reinforced, I guess is what I want to know.
Yeah, it was. I think for the first month, I just put my head down and got to work. I wasn't expecting to see results. I wasn't expecting anything. And I still use that now. I lost all the weight, and I'm sort of doing it again recently where I'm just trying to get the last couple of kilos off and eat more whole foods. So I knew back then I had no expectation for the first month. I thought I'm just going to put my head down and not look at the scales, not worry about anything. But after about 2 weeks in of just being consistent, I noticed that my pants were getting looser, and I think I eventually did weigh myself, and I'd lost about 3 or 4 kilos, I think, in the first sort of 3 or 4 weeks. So that then gave me a bit of momentum to keep going once I started seeing the results. But the mindset was just always there to push through. The results just, once you hit that first little milestone, that sparks you on to do the next one, to see how far you can go the next week. And then, how far you could walk, how far you could run in a session. I think I was running for about 5 minutes after a half an hour walk. And then, the next week I could run for 6 or 7 minutes out of a 20-minute walk. And then eventually it was, you could run for a half an hour. So, yeah, definitely that once you gain momentum, it's quite easy to keep going.
So it sounds like it actually became fun for you, and you started kind of pushing yourself and been competing with yourself, like I can do this and I can do that. And really getting into enjoying it, which is really the whole point of life, is to enjoy it. And yours started with a decision of, I don't like the way things are right now with my body and with my lifestyle. And that decision was powerful. You came into it going, I'm changing this because I want things to be better. And then it was hard, because it is hard to make a change like that. But once you got into it, then it became fun again. Yeah. And then you started really enjoying it. And so now here you are in the lifestyle, living it and feeling so much satisfaction with life. Yeah,
definitely. And, like I was super inspired at the start and really motivated, but inspiration does wear out, and that sort of initial excitement and motivation, it does wear off. But I had made, a commitment to myself and a promise that I was going to keep going, and after a while it did sort of taper that motivation, but it got to a point where I got super determined and fully committed, and, I kept going regardless. So I started building this sort of mindset where I'm doing this no matter what. And I had days where I didn't feel like going running and eating well and all of those things, but I did it anyway because I knew my cause was stronger. So the days where I didn't feel like going, I just switched that thought process off and I went. So, and I had runs where as my fitness improved, my run time started to improve. I was running for longer, my pace picked up, and, I was going for like a 10K run most days. So, yeah, and I'd get a couple of Ks into a run where I didn't feel great and I could have any excuse in the world to stop and give up. Like, oh, my legs, their hammies are a bit tight today or whatever. But I pushed through that, and I just push, get to 5Ks and see how you feel. And then I'd get to 5Ks and I'd actually start feeling okay. And that would sort of snowball. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to go to 8. And then next thing you know, I'd get my 10K run out and I felt fantastic. And I would actually feel even better for keeping going when I felt like I didn't want to. So that was another really strong piece of my mindset that I was developing, was pushing through when you weren't really into it, I suppose.
Well, you're kind of inspiring me because I have never been a runner. Like, okay. I can get on the elliptical and I can go forever. But running like outside on the street, it is hard. I get side aches, and my husband is a runner and he doesn't even like do it regularly, but he can run. He can just run. And now I'm thinking, well, maybe I just need to push a little bit to get past that point of discomfort and allow my body to get used to it. And then maybe I could enjoy it too, because now I don't enjoy it.
Oh, man. I was never a runner either. I never ran I never started running like as a runner until I was 37. So I used to play a lot of sport. And, I'd run playing tennis and football and cricket and stuff like that. But I was never, I just thought it was the dumbest thing ever. I used to sort of make fun of people at work, they're like, oh, I've got a run coach. And I was like, what do you need a run coach for? Like, one foot in front of the other and just keep going. Like, but then once I got into it, like, I totally got it, because I then developed a couple of little injuries as I started pushing my performance, as you do when you get right into it. And I had trouble with my knee, and so I started reading and studying and looking at the way I ran and how to not let it happen again, because, injuries is a great teacher, and setbacks, you learn from those. So I learned then to I just started reading like crazy. I got my hands on any sorts of books about running and running marathons and ultra marathons, because that's kind of where I started looking as I improved. And I thought, geez, what a great turnaround that would be to, go from this overweight guy to running an ultra marathon. So it kind of, that was my next goal.
Would you like to have an ad-free experience? I know you probably have my intro and my outro memorized by now, and maybe you just kind of want to cut out that ad space, this one right now that you're listening to, so that you can just get all of the content of the episode. Well, if that does sound like something that you're interested in, I've put together a Patreon account, and I'm offering all of the episodes I've recorded so far without that extra stuff, so you just get the content. And I'm also going to be offering members early access to the newly released episodes. So I'll be putting those on Patreon several days before the episode releases on all the other podcast platforms. So you'll be able to listen before everybody else. You can find the link to the Patreon in the show notes. And I'm also going to post on social media, so you should be able to find it on all of my pages there as well. I look forward to getting to know all of you guys better and engaging in some co-creating together. For now, I'll just get back to the episode. See you on Patreon.
So now I'm really curious how the podcast fits into this, because the name of it, the Inner Expeditions, it sounds like it has a lot to do with that journey. Is that how it was born?
Yeah, it was. And it was kind of my wife's, she really inspired the title, because we were sitting around talking one night, and during the time where I was working away, I'd lost most of the weight, but the working away, being away from my family, started getting me down a bit. So I was struggling. I started to struggle with anxiety pretty badly. And luckily, the running side of things had given me some tools to, self-belief and achieving goals was really good for that. So I then started to think, okay, I've got fit and I've got my fitness under control. I'm feeling really good, but mentally I'm not doing so great. So I then decided that was the side I needed to work on to be 100% fully fit, was physically and mentally. And I looked at my lifestyle and the job, and I thought, okay, I need to change the work situation, because a lot of people work away. It's really good money, like it's great money, but the lifestyle of living and working away from your family at sort of blocks of time isn't great. So I started, working on that. And at the time, I didn't think we could get by without all of the extra money, but it got to a point where I didn't really have a choice. I was sort of that bad, and the anxiety had really got hold of me quite strongly, and it was just paralyzing, every thought that I had. So I walked away from it fairly instantly, and I guess there was more learning from there then, obviously dealing with everything internally, which kind of inspired the show, The Inner Expeditions, was working on myself and, working on being a more conscious person. And it's hard to explain, you kind of pick that you have to walk the steps to get the experience and get the knowledge. But that was the next part where I started sort of delving inward to work on myself to be happier.
Are you podcasting full time?
Not full-time. I'd like to. I've got a full-time job here in Exmouth now. I've sort of bounced around a few roles in town. I took a bit of time off after I finished working away. And then, I've just sort of taken jobs where I can, and, then that'll turn into a full-time job, and then that job might turn into a better paying job, and I've kind of gone from there. But, definitely the goal would be to podcast full-time one day. It's sort of kind of, I don't know, I feel like everything that I'd been through and all of my experiences, I was like, how am I going to use this to help other people? I kind of feel like I found my purpose, and everyone I would speak to about what I'd been through and overcoming the anxiety and all of those things, I feel like I've got something to offer people. And whether that was, I think early on I was just, going to start a trail running store or something like that, just to sort of, help people with their running equipment, because people would always ask me, what running watch do I wear, or what shoes do I wear, or they'd speak to me about hydration and nutrition and all of that sort of stuff. So, and
you'd done all the research, so you knew this is the way to go.
Yeah, and it was just through getting it wrong, I sort of you learn from what works for you and what doesn't. So that was kind of where I thought I would go, but it was kind of a small platform and quite unsustainable in a really small town for that. So then I thought, well, I could maybe do a podcast. And I listened to a lot of really great podcasts at the time, and some of them had really helped me out through those tough times. So it sounded quite insane, but then once I started thinking, this is something that could help other people, sharing my story, and even something for my kids, to hear my voice when they're older, and
Yes.
long into the future, there might be something in there for them as well.
I've thought of that too for my kids. That's nice. It's like a legacy in a way.
That's right. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I want to talk about the anxiety a little bit because, that's kind of my wheelhouse is mental health and psychology and everything. And when I was listening to you touched on it, and it seemed that the onset of it had a lot to do with you quitting your job.
Yeah.
And now here comes the stress of how are we going to maintain our lifestyle without this income?
Yeah.
Would you agree that was kind of what brought on the anxiety? It was money related?
Yeah, a bit of it was. A lot of it was confidence-based as well, because I was working in a kind of industry where, there's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of good positions that come up. And I'd worked in the bush a long time and I was pretty confident with what I could do, but sometimes it can sort of depend on where you fit in and who you're friends with in the industry. So I lost a lot of confidence in myself at that time as well. And then once I gave up the work, I was driving about 14 hours to get to work. I wasn't flying because the flights, I had to fly from where I lived to Perth and then back up to the city that I worked. And then it was about a 4-hour drive inland into the sort of middle of nowhere. And flights were getting really expensive. So I thought I'll start driving. So I had a lot of time to think while traveling, and I was listening to a lot of audiobooks, a lot of podcasts. But yeah, that anxiety, I guess it really just snowballed once, and anyone that's had anxiety can definitely relate that once it gets hold, it's a very paralyzing condition because it just completely freezes every thought that you have, especially when they're sort of about yourself and confidence-based. So I clearly remember just walking away from my job because I was a mess. I just woke up one morning. I just got back to work and I woke up the next day and there wasn't 1 ounce of me that wanted to be there. So I woke up, I did the pre-start. We had a drill crew on site at the time. So we had our morning meeting and I remember I just went back to my room straight after that and just cried. I was curled up in a ball on my bed and I was just a complete wreck. So I rang my wife and I just said, I don't think I can do this anymore. And she said, that's fine. She said, whatever you need to do, you just get yourself home and we'll work it out. So,
well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a really powerful moment. And the next thing I did is I rang my boss and I resigned. I just said, I can't do this anymore. I said, I'm really struggling for a lot of reasons. I don't think I fully explained it at the time, but so yeah, I resigned from my job. And I've never resigned on the spot before. I always give notice. I've always, I like to do the right thing, but I wasn't at a point where I could do that. So I got in my car and I put my backpack, because I usually travel pretty light. I think I had a couple extra things. I put them in my car and I drove home. And I just remember in that drive, I had friends ringing me just to, wish me the best and say that they were really happy for me because they knew, I think, what it was doing. And I remember a huge weight being lifted at that point from that, and I got home and my wife already had a job. She lined up a job that night and I went and picked the kids up, friends that had the kids for the afternoon, and Renee had actually started work that day. So it was
wow,
incredible.
What a
incredible
woman.
support. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So I was very lucky.
So really the anxiety started before. The anxiety was kind of prompted by that career, that job.
Yeah, it was definitely creeping in, yeah.
And then when you quit, I know you said you felt a weight lift when people were checking in on you and things.
Mm.
Did you feel at that moment that the anxiety was released? Did it still kind of linger? Did other things kind of add to it? What happened with the anxiety at that point?
Yeah, at that point, it was a huge release and it felt great. And it took me a few days just to really, I guess, decompress after the whole thing. But, it didn't really sort of go away straight away. I think, I probably for the next year or two, it probably got a bit worse because I think I had an idea that when I quit working away that I was like, okay, this lifestyle is just, I'm done with this, and I'd really like to maybe sell the house, get a caravan, and just go traveling with the family, because my wife and I had travelled for about 7 or 8 years when we were younger, travelling around Australia, and I love that lifestyle and that open, life. So I thought that's what we would do is, just sell everything and just get out of here. And, I was really struggling with my confidence as well, and the jobs that I eventually started working in, I was working in these really quite dynamic teams with people, and I didn't really think that I was up to their level of capability. So that sort of started putting extra pressure on myself, and I got a bit down because I wasn't providing this lifestyle to my family that I thought that they deserved, and I was probably still putting pressure on myself because I was away, and putting that stress on my wife for having to cope with 2 kids at that point while I was away. So yeah, it kind of actually got a bit worse there for maybe a year or two. And it was probably some of my darkest days were in that period, for sure.
Yeah, I was curious because usually with things like that, when you have a lot of negative feelings, and for you associate it with your job and you're like, okay, I got to quit this. The feelings don't just automatically get better, right? It's still there. There's, I speak a lot about vibration and frequency, and there was a vibration that was involved with you and that point in your life and where you were focused, and it kind of went with you. Quitting your job didn't solve all the problems because you were still having that. And you mentioned that it was a lot of confidence based. So that's amazing that you had that insight to know really what the root of it was. It wasn't really the job specifically. That was a part of it, but it was the confidence. It was the confidence that was the root.
Yeah. And I didn't really pick up on that until I started getting my confidence back, just all that self-doubt and self-talk. And I found that it wasn't just what I was saying to myself. It was the tone that I was saying it in as well. And I listened to something really interesting. It was a radio program on ABC. It's kind of like, the free to air sort of radio. And they had a language person on. And they were talking about languages, and he was saying that the exact same thing. He said, if you talk negatively to yourself, he said, you'll find that when you were younger, if you had, that gym coach that spoke to you that way, that really sort of toned you down, you wouldn't just say the words, the tone would be in that voice, that you remember from someone, whether or not that was relevant to what I was going through. I just remembered the fact that he was saying it's how you say things to yourself as well. So
at that point, did you consciously start to change that around, start to be nicer to yourself, to be kind, to say nice things, and to have a positive tone?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really a few things happened all at once, where I was working for a transport company, and I was driving, it was about a 6-hour drive to another town, and I had another really good podcast on, and the guest there had been through a lot, and he just talked about self-forgiveness. And I remember he said, you've just got to forgive yourself for whatever it is you're holding on to yourself. It could be a variety of things. Just forgive yourself for all of those things. And I remember I did that. It was on the drive. It really hit me hard, and it was a clear turning point for me. Was on this drive. It was dark. It was first thing in the morning, and I was up in this truck, driving 6 hours, and I forgave myself for whatever it was that I was holding on, and I started crying, and it was a really powerful moment. And about 5 kilometres up the road, after I had this sort of realisation, and I started sort of taking it easy on myself, and it was a massive corner, a huge shooting star went right across the sky. And it just lit up, like really, it broke up and lit the entire night sky up. It was incredible, and it just made it more powerful and made me realise that I'd turned a corner. So it was incredible.
I love that. You are so connected.
It's hard not to be, like I didn't start off to do this on the path, I just wanted to lose a little bit of weight, and the next thing you know, I'm sort of getting down in this quite deep journey, and I'm just a beginner in all this stuff, and being a more conscious person. I'm sort of entry level at it, but I'm really getting into it, and working on being a more conscious person, and everything about what I'm trying to do or for myself is all part of that inner expedition, and that's why it sort of was only natural that the show would entitle that, I guess.
That's beautiful, really beautiful.
Thanks.
So what would you say to anybody listening who's kind of relating and thinking, I really hate my life and I hate my body or my job or whatever it is that they're not liking about their life? What's your advice to somebody like that?
I think a big one for me was that I felt like I was trapped, that I had no options and I had nowhere to go. I can't leave the job. I can't do this. I can't change my current situation, and you've got no control over it. You just feel like your life is spiraling out of control because all your decisions aren't in your hands, and they totally are. And there's a fear of what's on the other side of making some big changes and the unknown. And if you can face those fears, it doesn't matter what it is, if you can get across the line, face them, and just knowing that what's on the other side, that everything's going to be okay. If it's something new and you've lived your whole life this way, that it's okay to change, and just surrender to the things that you can't change, but what you can change, definitely, you can change it, and whatever is on the other side, how terrifying that may seem, that it can't be any worse than where you currently are at if it's getting to you that badly.
Well, you are a wonderful example of that in real life. And I just thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with me and with my audience and with everybody. I encourage everybody to go check out the Inner Expeditions podcast. And thanks again for being here.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks, Katie, for having me on. It's it's great experience, a great show. I love your cause. I love what you're about as well, is just getting that message out. So I'm more than happy to be a part of it and share some of my story to help people.
If you're enjoying the podcast, you can show your support by leaving a rating and a review on your favorite podcast platform. You also can follow Dr. Williams' podcast on all social media platforms and subscribe on YouTube and by going to www.drwilliamspodcast.com. Deliberate creation is the key to living life satisfied, and that is my wish for all of you.